Hello and welcome back to Outspoken by Femme Health, where we dive deep into the stories of innovators, change makers and trailblazers who are redefining what's possible. Today I'm thrilled to introduce to you to someone whose work is reshaping how we navigate transitions and embrace growth. Rebekah, the visionary founder of Liminal. Liminal is more than just a brand or a concept. It's a movement dedicated to helping individuals and organisations thrive in those in-between moments of uncertainty and possibility. Whether it's guiding people through life's biggest changes or empowering businesses to pivot with purpose, Rebekah's approach is both profoundly insightful and refreshingly practical. With a unique blend of creativity, empathy and strategy, she's here today to share her journey, the inspiration behind Liminal and her vision for a world where transitions are seen not as obstacles but as opportunities for transformation. So without further ado, let's dive into this enlightening conversation with Rebekah. Hello.
Oh, hello, thank you for that gorgeous introduction, Steph.
I know. Imagine if we could all just get introduced in life with something amazing like this.
Yes, I definitely feel a happier human.
Yes. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm busy. 2025 has got, I think, actually a really positive energy. I'm feeling that quite a lot of the focus around midlife and female health has really gained momentum sort of from that grassroots activism we've seen in the UK over the last few years to something that feels increasingly like there's this groundswell of support. And I get the feeling that 2025 year is going to be this year of quite significant change in terms of how we're supported as females. So yeah, I'm excited to what's to come.
And I'm all here for that. I don't know, I'm the same with 2025. Just the numbers itself, it's something very positive and very exciting. And myself, me and you have been chatting offline for nearly a year now. So yes, I am so excited to not only stock your incredible brand Liminal, which went live on Femme Health this week, but to actually have this time to have a conversation that I imagine will be so empowering. And I'm just really excited to pick your brain and hear all about your journey. So to kick us off, Rebekah, who is Rebekah and who is Liminal?
Wow.
Big question.
Two big questions. Yeah, exactly. So I am a 51-year-old woman. I have been for most of my career in the field of research, and specifically the field of narrative research, which basically means I spent most of my career collecting stories and looking to understand the wants and needs, the ambitions, the aspirations of people all over the world. And I worked within the kind of creative industries for most of my career. And it was whilst working actually in an agency that I founded myself that perimenopause knocked me sideways. And that really is, I guess, the founding story of Liminal as a community. I was very unwell during my perimenopause journey because it happened, I guess, 8 years ago now in terms of me seeking help. The information just wasn't out there in the way that it is now. Yeah. In fact, the word perimenopause wasn't really something I'd come across until I discovered it myself within some medical journal. And so my route back to health really was the inspiration behind creating a community. And it was a very organic process. Because I'd become so unwell myself, it became very difficult for me to work. So in terms of the diagnosis and the support I got, my doctor quite understandably diagnosed me as being depressed or burnt out. And when I look back at that appointment, I don't feel anything other than empathy for that doctor, actually, because when I look at the ailments I presented myself with, when I consider how little training doctors, particularly then, but actually still today, get in terms of female biochemistry, it's hardly surprising that he reached the conclusion he did. You know, I was working very hard, I was running my own company, I had, teenage sons, I had a very ill father, I had a lot of responsibilities in terms of being a caregiver for my dad as well, and I was very tired, and I rocked up at this appointment on my knees practically, and the symptoms that manifested themselves for me were not the ones that we would typically associate with menopause. I think, again, we're becoming much more educated now, but it was anxiety, it was sleeplessness, it was weight gain, it was hormonal acne, my hair was falling out. I'd become so sort of unable to hold a conversation that I'd rehearse before I even went into the office, just conversations I could have in the lift, because my brain fog was so bad. And I'd pushed myself, I'd kind of done this thing I think that so many of us do as women in midlife. I just decided that there was somehow a deficiency or weakness in me, so I would just work harder, I would get up earlier, I would rehearse more fully for these presentations. And also, as a researcher, you have to have all of this stuff in your head that you're supposed to be able to present back, and I had to work so hard just to retain information. So when I think about the conversation I had with my doctor, absolutely I was burning the candle at both ends and struggling, but what he wasn't able to do was join the dots and kind of trace that back to hormones. And I always say that being a researcher is effectively what saved me, in that I was very privileged in that I could, as the founder of a small consultancy, stop work for 6 months. I mean, how many of us get the opportunity to actually do that and prioritise our health? And also, because I'm a lover of data and stuff, I treated myself like a project. So again, not everybody likes reading through reams of stuff, and not everyone has been trained in sort of hustling their way into conferences to speak to people. But I think because I'd had that training as a researcher, because I knew how to listen hard and ask questions and assimilate information quite quickly, I was able to discover this life stage that no one had told me about, but also it really fired my curiosity. And as I started to apply the protocols that I was learning about, I tiptoed onto Instagram actually to do what me as a researcher would always do, which is let's ask some other people, like how did they get through this? What did they learn? What are their hopes for the future? And as a researcher, normally when you ask people to tell you things, you either have to reward them with an Amazon voucher, or you have to it's really hard to get people, because why would they give you, time in their busy day? But with this as a topic, I'd never even been onto Instagram before. I had to be taught how to set up my account. I just got this influx of not just kind of like black and white yes no answers to my survey, but the long form questions, and they went on for paragraphs and paragraphs. And what I realised was that women, one, were navigating this life stage largely on their own. Two, women have this phenomenal capacity for generosity, where we're all driven, and I'm sure this is true for you as well, Steph, we're all driven by wanting to ensure that whatever we've experienced, we can pass on what we've learned. Yeah. And I think we do that as women because we live in a world where we've always been presented as other. And so whether it's having babies, whether it's managing your PMS, whether it's managing difficult, challenging conversations at work, we tend to come together as women and share strategies and share insights. And it's probably even more true for the taboo topics. And so with menopause, I couldn't believe the kind of outpouring of generosity that I got back. And it made me think, if I could smash together all of that wisdom that women carry in their bones and all of that generosity with the latest thinking and the emerging science around the potential of botanicals that were really helping me, but also, modalities like breath work and all of the other things I was implementing, if you could kind of bring those lived experience with kind of clinical insight together, you could create something quite special. And so that's kind of what Liminal has become. We're like this co-invention community where we formulate supplements that we then sort of prove out in terms of efficacy in real life with our community. But we also, as you know, are very, very committed to presenting a sort of whole body and mind approach through the lens of naturopathy, because that's what transformed my health. Mm-hmm. And so we will also be sharing, information on the latest research into acupressure, or, hosting hormone therapy roundtables where you can get access to really balanced perspective from doctors, but also understand how, if you layer up medical intervention and then you look at your nutrition, what else can we kind of deliver in terms of impact on how we feel and how we age well. And so that's kind of what we've ended up becoming. We're 4 years old. We've grown very, very organically as a business, but I think the thing I'm proudest of is I feel like it's put the female voice at the heart of female health, and I think so often that is missing. It's absolutely our role is not to make assumptions, is to not tell people how to navigate part 2, is to give them agency so they pick the tools that work for them.
Yeah. Wow. It's a very empowering story, and I just want to go back to what you were saying at the beginning about pushing yourself and getting up earlier and practicing harder. I think we have to sometimes stop. I could sit here for this whole podcast talking about the amazing things that I know that you've done for yourself, for other women, for research, for businesses. But just going back to yourself and your journey, how much pressure you put on yourself because you didn't have that support at that time. And I think looking back, how does that, do you look back knowing what you know now? Do you look back at yourself and feel sorry for the pressure you were putting on yourself at that moment in your life?
It's funny, isn't it? It feels like when I look back, it's almost like looking at a completely different person, because I think the interesting, in your introduction you highlighted, and I do genuinely believe that these transitional moments are transformational as well. So you often go through quite a significant change in terms of who you are. Maybe it's some practitioners would argue it's almost like a returning to yourself. But I think I grew up in an environment where the creative industry is very male dominated historically, so very few women in it. I'd really had to hustle and work harder than anyone else, and that became kind of like normal. Like it was normal. We were talking outside of the podcast about dragging ourselves into the office ill, sort of like losing teeth and getting kidney failure because I hadn't got time to go to the dentist, I hadn't got time to see a doctor. And it was a badge of honour, I think. I was a single mum as well for a long time, and so that was another thing that I had to almost disprove the assumptions I knew that were there before I even walked into a room. So I had to be better, I had to be better prepped, I had to be working harder because I was leaving at 5:30 to collect my son, and so I'd have to burn the midnight oil just to show everyone that I wasn't slacking. So I think that's just how I grew up, and I felt so cross with my body when it stopped allowing me to do that. I remember the early stages of perimenopause feeling very angry with myself and my body. I didn't know why it wasn't working, and although I was having all of these symptoms, I didn't for 1 minute think that this was my body communicating something. And there's a beautiful reflection that really stayed with me actually when I was doing the early research and talking to different practitioners. I kind of became a bit of a human guinea pig. One of the things I tried was Wim Hof, the cold water exposure.
Yes.
So really helpful for me, and it sounds like for you as well. But the practitioner who hosted the first session I went to said my father had just died at this point, and I was grieving, and I was so unwell. And she said to me, if you listen to your body when it whispers, it wouldn't have had to scream. And I think it's such a beautiful reflection, isn't it? That sometimes, our symptoms are a signal. And quite often as women, we just push on through. And then basically, at some point, your body's going to go, no. And that, right. So it wasn't really that my body was betraying me. It was doing everything it could to protect me. I just wasn't listening.
Okay. That's really, really empowering. I'm going to have to use that somewhere and at you on social media. Okay, I want to just stop there a moment and just go back to menopause and the scaremongering around it. And the reason why I want to bring this up on this podcast is that we did a menopause mixer for a gorgeous group of ladies back in September in Cheshire. And one thing that I really noticed from the demographic was the age range of the people buying the tickets. 30, 33, 35, not the menopause age, I thought we would attract people that were just started to experience the symptoms or in the depths of perimenopause, and it wasn't the case. And afterwards, you have that opportunity to network, and I got chatting to some of the ladies, and they said, we saw it on the community groups, and I'm scared. I am scared. I work in an office with women going through it. Everybody's talking about it. I know it's 15, 20 years away, but I'm scared, and I want to understand what it is. What do you say to women, and do you experience that young demographic coming into your community? Is this something that you are experiencing as a brand?
What a beautiful thing, actually, doing a menopause mixer that kind of allows younger women to explore their hormones. The short answer to your question is yes. I think as the kind of conversation around menopause has grown, particularly in the UK, we are seeing younger and younger women expressing concern. There's an element of empowerment. You know, when I look at it through this kind of lens of positivity, I think what we're also learning, and the generation that's following us is much more in tune with their cycles. They're much more aware of how hormone fluctuations impact their mood, their sleep pattern, their hunger. And I think they're looking at menopause and looking to understand that in the same way. But what we have to remember is that it's only in the last 2 years that menopause has been introduced as a topic within the biology classes at school. So that generation who are looking to get more information, they probably are better informed about cycles, but they have no idea what menopause means. And I think quite understandably, whenever you're looking to sort of unpick a taboo, what media does is focus on the urgency of addressing something that's been hidden in the shadows. And the way they do that is with the most negative stories, with the most kind of shocking headlines, because it forces a reaction. And so I completely understand how that strategy works, but I think the danger with that is you do end up in this kind of critical view of menopause, where it's seen as this kind of end of life category, rather than a transition into something that, when you look at the data, is an incredibly empowering stage of life for females. And we do know from a research perspective that if we learn younger and younger how to harness our hormones, we don't need to go through the kind of bumpiness that I experienced. It was very much my lack of education and my lack of care for myself that resulted in me experiencing the symptoms that I did. And I think that's what we need to be communicating to this younger generation, is that their biochemistry is phenomenal. You know, women have got so much to offer the world, and as you know, my sort of vision for Liminal is a world where women can be well, which sounds ridiculous, but when you look at all of the barriers that are put up, whether that's educational, systemic, it's really hard for us to stay well throughout our lives, because the research just isn't there either. But I think inviting these women in, and to your point, I think the danger of presenting menopause as this kind of disease or deficiency is it kind of, as a feminist, for me, it exacerbates this perception that we are other, that whenever anything happens that's related to our biochemistry, it's seen as faulty or you know, something that needs to be fixed. However, to present it as a natural transition without recognizing that severe symptoms are not normal is an issue as well. So I kind of I would encourage both sides, you know, this kind of medicalization and this natural movement to recognise that what we're really looking to offer women is agency and control over their bodies. And many of us will have huge benefit from medication, but it's not a silver bullet. You know, taking HRT doesn't address how you digest stress, for example. And if you don't learn how you digest stress, then the external impact of life, which happens in all of its colour in midlife usually as well, will impact your hormones. And sex hormones alone aren't the only thing that we need to think about in midlife. So again, you know, there isn't a sort of silver bullet to navigating this life stage. Instead, I believe it's a huge opportunity to kind of push yourself up the priority list and really discover what it is to be female. And then part 2 can be phenomenal.
Yeah, incredible. So I'm 37 this year. I had to think about that for a moment. So what would you say, knowing what you know now and, you know, being the founder of Liminal, what would you say to me that I can do now? I mean, obviously, educate, I know you're going to say education. But are there something that you wish, you know, you could have told your younger self that you'd have known now, whether that was breath work, meditation, we've touched on Wim Hof. Are there things that we can be doing a lot younger?
Yeah, I think there's some really practical steps. So I actually think it's never too soon to have a conversation with your doctor around hormone balance, because many of us wait until we're really, really unwell before we go and see our doctors. But so that's kind of issue number 1. But I think issue number 2 is we can feel very pressurized then to make a decision that we don't feel entirely equipped to make. And you also want to have a doctor who can almost act as a friend through this period, because it might be that you talk about hormone therapy, for example, and you decide it's not quite right for you yet. But what you want is a really empathetic doctor that you can go back to and talk to about when it might be right for you. You know, at what point could it be something that's useful to you? So I think make your doctor your friend is like tip number one. And if your doctor isn't that kind of doctor, find a new doctor. And then recommendation number two would be look at how you digest stress. And, you know, to your point, Steph, that covers things like breath work. Wim Hof can be phenomenal for that. But I think we as women often don't realise the impact that stress has on our hormone balance. And so, you know, it impacts our gut microbiota, it impacts our ability to feel joy, it impacts our ability to sleep, and all of these things have a knock-on effect in terms of hormone regulation. So if you can really start to explore, when it's not urgent, different modalities, because you might not like breath work, you might sort of sit through it and think this really isn't for me, but you might love, I don't know, yoga, where you're using breath work whilst moving, and so it is actually still a form of breath work, but it feels like a very different experience to you. As you all know, Wim Hof also uses breath to warm up the body from within, and so there's very different ways that you can use these traditional protocols that have got a huge amount of research behind them. Try tapping. Tapping is one of those modalities where, again, there's a huge amount of science behind it now, but we still look at it as something that's slightly woo. So give yourself permission to be curious, try loads of things, but really focus on stress, because I think that is actually often the way that our symptoms first begin to manifest themselves. When we look at the data we collect, Liminal is a big co-invention space, and so we're always getting feedback from our community as they take our formulations, they track their symptoms. But the biggest symptom by far that women arrive at our community with is anxiety, and that again has that horrible washing machine effect, that if you're anxious, you're not going to sleep. If you're not sleeping, you're not going to be producing cortisol in the right way. You're not going to be able to control your hunger hormones. You're going to see weight gain around your middle. You're going to have cravings that you didn't have before. So really sort of like looking to address stress would be tip number 2.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I just wanted to just gather your thoughts on where you think we're at heading into a brand new year with menopause and the workplace, because as you said, you were lucky enough to own that company, take 6 months off, have that time to understand what was happening to yourself. And there are many other women that are in that role, but then there's others that are employed, and sometimes where I work, femme, we're female founded and we're all about hormones, and it's an incredible place to work because I feel supported and understood. But I've worked in male environments heavily throughout my career, and that just would not be a conversation that I would be able to approach.
Yeah.
So what do you do as a woman experiencing, impactful symptoms that are impacting your employment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also unfair when someone is struggling to expect them to change a culture, to sort of say, well, you need to go in and teach them about menopause so that you can then kind of get the support you need, because we do not have that capacity, nor should we be asked to have that when we're actually in the midst of it ourselves. So it's a very challenging conversation to have, and we've done quite a lot of work, as you flagged, within the workspace as well. And one of the worrying trends we've seen in the last couple of years is actually the number of women in the UK agreeing with the statement menopause is a taboo topic has actually increased. So although we've had all of this sort of media attention, we've seen government legislation change, we've seen syllabus change at school, in some ways, I think what's happened is because the conversation has been so negative, if you're not careful and you're not in an environment where there's a balance for you, you can feel even more uncomfortable, because it's like, oh my goodness, they're going to think that I'm going to be useless for the next 10 to 12 years. This isn't helping me get the support I need, and I don't want to tell people that it's menopause that I'm struggling with. I'd much prefer to tell them that I've got a cold or something else. And so that is definitely a worry, and I think the answer to that is a systemic one. We as individuals need to look to the companies and the trainers to ensure that when they're coming in to do menopause at work training, they're presenting the potential of women, not the diseased state of menopause that can sometimes be the fallback position, because you're not doing women any favours. It's absolutely important that we understand the impact and severity of some people's symptoms and how we can support them, but what you don't want to do is kind of hobble their opportunities for development and to thrive. What you really want is for companies to think that it would be a travesty to lose that skill, because that is the reality. Women have a huge amount to bring. So I think, number one, it has to be the systems and the cultures that change, and we as individuals, we often feel able to do that once we've got through. So what you'll find within the workplace quite often is the menopause champion is someone who's had a really hard time and kind of got out the other side, and that shouldn't be the way, but that is often the way that we see change happening. And if you look at the businesses in this space, it's often the same. It's women who've gone through really challenging situations, have gone, right, I don't want that for anyone else. So I think that's kind of, I know that doesn't help someone in the middle of menopause at work where they're not in a culture where it's supportive. If you are in that scenario, I think there's a number of things you can practically do. One, you don't have to have a conversation on your own. So having an advocate or a member of staff with you when you talk to your boss or line manager about your symptoms, I think can be really helpful, and it can keep people's prejudices in check. You know, if there's someone else in the room having that conversation and advocating for you, that can make a huge difference. The second thing is you do have legal rights, so you do not have the right to be discriminated against. So make sure you understand the UK legislation that has come into place and the fact that you know companies are obliged to listen. And I think the third thing is remember that you don't need to do it face to face if you don't feel comfortable doing it face to face. You know, quite often we will counsel women on sending a carefully crafted letter outlining what they need, and I think quite often as well it's worth you thinking about what would be helpful. Because one of the challenges is not necessarily sort of prejudice, it's often ignorance, you know, and what you'll get often is that, you know, an offer of a fan on your desk at a duvet day, none of which is going to deliver what you need. But what you might want to say is, if you're, you know, struggling in the way that I did, I found it really anxiety inducing to stand up and host meetings, which I used to be able to do. You know, could I have asked to pre-record and send it in and then invite questions? Probably. Could I have asked to do it remotely so that I could manage the temperature and my hot flashes from you know, in this kind of environment over Zoom, rather than doing it in a boardroom where I wasn't controlling the temperature, and if I had a hot flash there was nothing I could do. You know, there's a number of things that we can practically ask for, I think, as women, which means that you're in control of the support you get, and at every point it's absolutely clear that this isn't about you being less capable. This is about you needing certain tools to ensure that you continue to deliver more than, you know, than is expected, because that is what women do. So yeah, that would be my advice for women.
That's incredible. Really, really empowering. And I think the key point to take away there for me is to stand up and ask, because as women, we always talk about this at head office about pain, is we normalise pain. It's not normal. We normalise birth. I'm very triggered with birth. I had sepsis. My daughter had sepsis. We were, you know, in intensive care. We were in hospital for a month. So when anybody goes to have a baby, I'm really on edge, because I don't think it's a normal experience because of my experience. And I think, you know, looking back, there's certain things that I could have put in place to make myself more comfortable, but you don't always. You sit quiet. You don't want to look like you're making a fuss. You don't want to look like you're being a drama queen, and that is just not the case. You are putting your well-being first so that you can do your job and live your life.
Exactly. Could not agree more.
Yeah, I do feel, Rebekah, that we could do a whole season on talking just myself and you about this topic. You know, it's not something that we can do in one episode, and I know we're going to do lots more together this year. I've been to your events. I know you've got a very exciting calendar coming up, and we have your fantastic products now stocked at Femme Health. So before we wrap up this episode, I just wanted you to just talk us through the products, because I know it's not community is at the heart of everything you do, but I know it's supported by an incredible collection. So if you could just talk us through that would be fantastic.
Thank you. So I think the thing that is perhaps differentiating about the way that we've approached our whole food-led formulations is that we've done that through a naturopathic lens. So we're very much about ensuring that your body is supported from a foundational perspective in midlife. And our products are designed to work alongside hormone therapy if that's the path that you choose, but also to act as a really valuable herbal solution to many of the kind of symptoms that we may find ourselves faced with. There are 2 foundational powders, and again, they were developed in cohort with our community. So the other thing that we do as a which again is quite unusual as a business, is we constantly refine our formulations. And to the beginning of our conversation, when we were talking about 2025, the reason we do that is that science doesn't stand still. And I think for me, when I was looking at solutions and ways to get myself back to sort of full health again, I wanted the latest insight. I didn't want something that had been developed 10 years ago and was then sort of sold en masse. I wanted something that was constantly responding to what we're learning, because it feels like we're at such a rich point now in terms of looking to the potential of adaptogens, botanicals, nootropics. There's so much happening. So those foundational powders have 29 plus ingredients in them. They act as a really beautiful foundational layer based on the symptoms that you're most likely to experience at perimenopause and menopause. So they're called PeriBoost and MenoBoost. And then we have 2 capsule formulations, which again have come out of 4 years of tracking symptoms with our community. And what we discovered when we looked at their symptoms, specifically across that 10 to 12 year trajectory, is that there were these cluster symptoms that kind of show up together. Mood Food is designed to address the most persistent of those, which is anxiety, sleep and mood. And it uses a blend of botanicals, and again, we always use the best researched ones. We know actually as practitioners that there is a lot more out there from Mother Nature that we could harness, but I think because the supplement space can feel a little snake oily, for us it's been really important to focus in on the ones that do have the clinical support behind them. So those ingredients are selected for them having the best efficacy support in clinic, and then obviously we do our own product impact studies as well and are constantly monitoring with our community the impact that blend has. And then the final one in our little range, small but beautifully formed, is called Gut Instinct, and that one we're probably proudest of actually, because it's very unusual within the gut health space. It's a prebiotic, so it doesn't have any probiotic qualities to it, and it's purely naturopathic, so there's no vitamin and minerals added. It's a whole food formulation, and the results have been off the charts for this one. It was one of those product impact studies where we thought we got the data wrong, because we had 100% efficacy, which you don't get in trials. And even in the consumer domain, where we know our audience isn't taking the product every day because you just don't get that compliance in the real world, the results are phenomenal. We're seeing men taking it because their partners are evangelizing so much, and it's designed to basically get your gut back in balance. In menopause, our gut microbiota is also impacted by that hormonal shift, and that has huge knock-on effects in terms of our health, as we're all beginning to learn more about. But using prebiotics is really key, because probiotics can be phenomenal. But when your body is out of balance and highly sensitized, the challenge with probiotics as a supplement is that unless it's the right strain of bacteria, you can sometimes exacerbate symptoms. So many in our community will talk about taking probiotic supplements, and maybe the bloating gets worse or the constipation gets worse. That's often a sign that there's nothing wrong with that probiotic supplement, but it might not be right for you. And the beauty of a prebiotic is that it gets your gut to do what it's supposed to do. So it feeds the gut, and the gut then produces the good bacteria that it's missing, rather than you feeding the gut bacteria, if that makes sense. So Gut Instinct is a really lovely one to start with, and it's also really helpful if you're younger, maybe not yet in your menopause transition, because it acts as that foundation layer to really nourish your gut. And from that, we've seen phenomenal results on people's skin, on their mood, because we know that gut axis has impact for basically our wellness right across the board.
Amazing. I don't know why, but when you explain it, it really excites me. I don't know, I just find it really exciting, one, that something's going to help when I get to this point, and two, the amount of research that's been backed up, because like you say, the supplement market, and as incredible as the influencer market can be for brands, it also I feel like it's got so, it's so big, You don't know who to trust, what to trust, you don't know what you're looking for. So when there is a brand like Liminal that is more than the product, you just have that element of trust more. And that they're the kind of brands not only that we want to work with on Femme, but that I personally want to take as well. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, Rebekah, so where do our listeners find you? Our products can be found on Femme's website, but if they want to find more about your community, they want to join your community, where do they find you?
Well, there's a number of routes in. I always suggest that you find us on Instagram, because it's not a sales environment. Our Instagram feed very much is focused on educational content, signposting to blog articles, signposting to other brands and information sources that we trust, talking to experts. So it's a really rich space for you to come and learn more about midlife and also the potential of your biochemistry. So you can find us at live_liminal on Instagram. Also, if you purchase from Femme and your little pouch arrives, you'll find on the back a QR code, and that can give you access to our health concierge team. So alongside being able to access the range through Femme, one of our commitments to all of our community is, if you want to talk about the other supplements you're taking, give us a call, because we're here for free to help you with your supplement surgery, as we call it, because quite often, because of the nature of our products, they're so complete, you may want to rethink what you're taking to make sure it's optimized for you. So there's access to our health concierge whenever you need it, and there's also access to our closed Facebook community. So you just need to scan that QR code on the back of your pouch and you can be let in. And that kind of closed community is just a really lovely supportive space, full of women navigating life together. Yes. And also our experts. So many of the experts that you would have met, Steph, at our hormone house parties, they're also present in that environment. So if you've got a question, if you're struggling, a member of the community is bound to have a perspective, but our experts are there to share their sort of thoughts with you as well.
Incredible. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I'm really excited for working more closely with you this year and seeing what's next for Liminal and, empowering women. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.